Hi, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Weni Teo, and I teach modern and contemporary art at the Courtauld. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the first event in the 2021 Frank Davis Memorial Lecture Series, Asian Art After Quarantine. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020, there's been a surge in racist attacks against Asian and Asian diasporic people across the globe, from everyday microaggressions to the recent mass shootings in Atlanta, USA in March 2021. In solidarity with social justice movements and organizations such as #I'mNotAVirus, Stop Asian Hate, and Stop Discrimination, the series aims to give voice and visibility to Chinese and Chinese diasporic artistic experience in a turbulent year marked by citywide lockdowns, a scarcity of funding and public platforms for the arts, the unmasking of institutional structures of racism, and heightened anti-Asian violence post-COVID. So today we are joined by the team behind Post from the First Lockdown, an online archive of artwork by more than 30 Chinese artists based in Wuhan in the Hubei region, produced during the first outbreak of the virus in what was the world's first citywide quarantine. Here to tell us more about the project and how it first came about are our three speakers who I have the pleasure of introducing. Gaia Fugazza is a London-based artist whose practice includes paintings and performance, exploring the troubled relationship of humans and the natural environment, plant knowledge, reproduction, and transcendental practices. Her work has been exhibited widely in venues such as Galleria Più, Bologna, Royal Academy, Lisson Gallery, Whitechapel Gallery, and Baltic Triennial. And she runs Grandine, an independent non-profit program of collaborative exhibitions and events in her studio in Hackney Wick. Gaia first initiated the project with Luigi Galimberti, a board member of Res Artist, the largest network of art residencies in the world. Luigi currently manages one of the UK's 9 creative clusters at the University of the Arts London, and from 2012 to 2016, he was director of Transnational Dialogues, an exchange program for artists, architects, designers, and writers across Brazil, China, and several European countries. Our third speaker today is Sha Li, an independent curator based in London and Vancouver, who joined the project in March 2020 and has played a key role in its ongoing development. Sha Li holds an MA of Curating Contemporary Art at Royal College of Art from Royal College of Art, London, and a BFA in Film and Integrated Media at Emily Carr University of the Arts and Design in Vancouver, and has since worked at various institutions, exhibitions, and on curatorial projects internationally, focusing on Asian perspectives on digital visual culture. So just to let you know the run through of today's events, we will first hear from Gaia and Luigi, who will talk about how the idea for this transnational email art project first came about. Following that, Shali will talk us through the design and curatorship of the website, and also discuss some of the artists and work in greater detail. Now, due to time difference and some issues with accessing Zoom in China, we've invited the artists, some of the artists, to pre-record their reflections on their experience a year later. And we'll be screening these short videos with subtitles for you today, followed by a Q&A. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. You can also check out the project website on www.lockdownpost.org. And I really am very pleased to say and to give a shout out to my MA students at the Courtauld, who also contributed to the translations and wrote some reflections on the works while they themselves were in lockdown. So without further ado, I think we should, I would like to hand over now to Gaia. And Gaia, perhaps you can begin by telling us a little bit more about how you initiated the project and some of the ideas behind that.
Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Wani, for the introduction. So what is now a website and online exhibition it originally started with the idea to be a show of mail art, actually like physical post being sent to my studio in London. I want to kind of bring the attention before speaking any further to the time in which this project was initiated and developed, because I think this year so many things have changed, and I find it sometimes hard to remember what was my knowledge and the knowledge of others, what is now like 15 months ago. So the post from the lockdown started as an open call, which was distributed at the beginning of February. It was an open call for art produced during the Juan lockdown by artists that were enduring this situation. And I asked Luigi, who had experience of working in China, to help with this project, and we translated it. And the open call was diffused mainly through WeChat. Thank you especially to Onto Space, project space in Juan. So what, how can I say? I'm kind of speaking about these dates because I and Luigi and later on we actually didn't know what COVID was going to become. And same for the artists that were submitting their artworks and producing artworks. They found themselves asked to stay at home because under very strict conditions, because of something they didn't have an idea what it was and how it will develop. Nobody knew exactly what this virus was, how long the incubation period was, who was going to be affected, and how long was the lockdown going to be. And we didn't know that was something that would actually spread worldwide quite soon. So I think for me, in my practice in general as an artist, I think, I really interrogate what are different states of consciousness in which thought and production happen, and this idea of this whole city being, all these individuals in this large city being isolated and being this situation of fear and loneliness and also unknown. I thought I wanted to hear what the artists were producing. And on top of that, there was a desire for a direct dialogue because I found that the media outlets were really contradictory. In theory, we were speaking about an illness, which is something that is normally spoken about in scientific terms and quite objective terms, but it seemed we were speaking about January, end of January 2020. It seemed like different medias from different governments were accusing each other of cover-ups or propaganda or anti. And so I think that I really had this desire of hearing from the people, having this experience, establish a direct connection. And it happened quite wonderfully because I don't know one person in Juan, and it was really thank you to, I think, Luigi's friends from Transnational Dialogues that we were able to establish this connection, also to the generosity of all the artists that decided to send works without actually knowing what we will do in the end, because I mean, origin was mail art, but very few people sent physical works, maybe 3, because then the postal service got interrupted. People could not leave their houses quite soon. And but I think that this distance was quite interesting to allow a very honest communication and also not hierarchical communication, because I literally could barely understand what was the first name or last name, or I had no idea which, you know, who were the artists, what was their CV, and they had no idea who I was, what was my studio. Like in a way, our internet is different, the characters are different. I can't even Google them, and they can probably on return Google me, but still, all the art, like many artists and beautiful and quite moving works, and that for me, other than allowing for, let's say, other than for being valid for what it was, formal expression, artistic value, it also gave me a kind of 2 months advance on knowing what was about to happen here. I mean, not that I knew at the beginning, I didn't know on the 10th of February, but by the time there was the first cases in Italy, where I'm from, actually, I'm from Milan, in the north of Italy, where COVID started really spreading very fast in 10th of February. For me, it was completely clear what was about to happen in the UK. So I had this month of feeling like, I don't know, almost as seeing like a disaster happening and very little political reaction. And I really wonder, like, why out of all this information, so maybe this, when it goes back to what you said about discrimination and just racism in a way, as like, how could we not know that a disease that had a certain effect in China and after had a certain effect in Italy, how did we know it wouldn't exactly spread or be as serious here? Like, for me, it was evident that it was going to be, and even more since there was no precautions being taken. But it was like, if scientific data were obscured by some discriminatory lenses that were reading them, and it's quite frightening that this was happening at very high political level, actually.
No, absolutely. I think it's so funny to think that, all of this took place just, a little more than a year ago, which now for us in the conditions in which we've lived, feels like such a long time ago. And a lot of what you're saying about how initially there was a lot of uncertainty and fear and anxiety about what this unknown, entity was, I think that's really reflected in so many of the work that's been submitted, And I remember you saying, which I always thought was really interesting, how, there's a kind of rawness and immediacy to the submissions that you received. And part of that was, in a way, because this was a call that was put forward by yourself, who is also an artist. And, there's a kind of connection there, right? I mean, you're not like representing an institution. There isn't that kind of filter in a sense. And I think that really kind of translates into the quality and the kind of, sort of unfiltered quality of a lot of the practice, a lot of the contributions to the project. And, from the position of an artist yourself, in the UK, reflecting on this, I mean, was that one of the motivations in a way, from the point of view of an artist, trying to understand what it was like to work under these conditions, of the artists in Wuhan?
Yes, definitely. And I think, I mean, it was kind of something that never happened in my lifetime, that there was such a virus, that a whole city will be in lockdown because of it. And from the trying to imagine, like, to be one of the artists that is in this situation, I saw that I'll have myself kind of an urge to produce, but I mean, not produce like, I kind of imagine that the works will be quite honest because they will be almost made for oneself rather than to be shown later on, because probably every project is kind of stopped. And also people were in a situation which they couldn't go out from their houses, even to go to their studios or so. So in fact, they're mainly drawings or digital works, just I think a couple of big paintings, but yes. And some of the works have this format that I really like of visual diaries, and it really helped kind of see the evolution of what was very interesting was like the evolution of the understanding of what was happening that was reflected in these 2.5 months of lockdown in Wuhan. Even major events such as the death of Dr. Li and Liang, it was kind of portrayed like, you know, there is this beautiful submission by Dong Mo, who really goes through 35 days of lockdown, which is still not, I mean, when he sent it and, you know, I replied, it was almost private letters. It was, I'm sure he didn't know how long that was going to last. In a way, when we did the first lockdown in the UK, I mean, we knew that it was gonna, if everybody was at home in 3 months, it would kind of, the situation would go under control, because we knew it happened there and it happened in Italy. And so it would probably happen here. Then, okay, here was open and close, so it lasted a year, a year more, and we still don't know when it's going to be over. But yes, I mean, I remember noticing, you know, I noted one of the artists kind of commented and wrote to me, I heard the situation in Europe is, I hope this is not going to be a Pandora box that will spread around the world. So it's just to give a context to what did we know back then. It was still something that happened there, and during the 3 months, actually, like the end of the open call corresponded almost exactly to the beginning of the lockdown in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, there's a real kind of poignancy about that, isn't
yeah.
it? I mean, the moment that the kind of Wuhan lockdown ended, when everyone first heard about it, it was something that was happening in a really far away part of the world, and, you know, nobody could really anticipate the kind of, you know, grim after effects of that, and how we would all eventually come to experience these, you know, very tense and fraught situations. I wonder if this is a good moment to bring in Luigi. You know, Luigi, perhaps you can talk also a little bit about how, you know, you guys, how the project evolved, as it were, due to certain constraints of, you know, the end of quarantine in Wuhan, beginning of quarantine in London, how that affected your strategies of display and thinking about it as an online project.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks, Wenny, for giving us the opportunity to share this project. And also thanks, Gaia, for bringing us back at the start of 2020. I've made a few notes. There are many things that could be said about this project, but I would like to highlight 3 main points. The first point is something that Gaia already mentioned, and this project is, at least for me, an archive of unmediated reactions to the situations that those artists were experiencing. And indeed, as Gaia said, there was a propaganda war from international media and governments. There was a vile rhetoric with clear racist connotations going on against the Chinese people and its communities all over the world. And I think that besides its artistic merits, this collection is extremely valuable as a repository of newsworthy stories. which is why we decided to publish the material as we received it, including the date of submission and whenever meaningful, the accompanying email. We only made a few integrations or translations into English, mostly thanks to the support of the students, the male students at the Courtauld, who have been amazing. And we did this to make the works more intelligible to a non-Chinese speaking public. The second point is that I think emerges from this archive is, I believe, again, in my opinion, is the artist as sophisticated observers of the reality. And this was particularly true during lockdown, and because artists are often in precarious conditions. And the lockdown exacerbated such conditions, and often they suffer from limitations imposed on them. But despite this, or possibly also because of this, they have developed tools to see what happens around them very clearly, and they develop tools to elaborate this intellectually, to elaborate this emotionally, or even physically, and to communicate it very effectively. And part of this effectiveness comes from having to constantly deal with censorship of one sort or the other, which kind of push them to refine the language and make the images do most of the work. But besides its public element, or its more kind of more political aspect of the project, what I like about this archive is that it is most of all a collection of personal stories. What we received and what is displayed on the website, most of the stories, if not all of them, they are deeply personal and recount intimate experiences of people of all ages dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences, particularly the impact on physical and mental health. Because we hear a lot about the impact of COVID on the economy. We hear a lot about when pubs can reopen, or when we can travel abroad for our holidays. However, more than 3 million people died because of COVID as of today, and the counter does not seem to stop. This is an immense loss, and this is a cause of pain for all those that lost friends or relatives. And this is what the pandemic is all about. And speaking about the pandemic and sharing our experiences as the artist participating in the project did, can help us feel more connected and can help us recover from this terrible shock. As a last remark, this project was born as a gesture of solidarity towards those that first lived through the horror of the pandemic, which in response generated an even stronger gesture of solidarity by those very artists that decided to share the works of art to help us live through the horror of the pandemic. This, I think the strong point about this is that this is a project which was born out of necessity. It's our necessity to share pain, our necessity of connecting with others, particularly in times where things are particularly uncertain, when we suffer, and when we don't understand the world around us. And this is about establishing unmediated dialogues, which is what artists and practitioners keep on doing against all odds.
Thank you, Luigi. That was really beautifully expressed. And I just wondering, before we invite Charlie to talk, to show us some images from the website and talk through some of the works, if you could share a little bit about how, this idea of the unmediated encounter with these works fed into the kind of structure and, your thinking around how these works would be presented in the form of a, in a digital platform, basically in the form of a website or blog.
Yeah, absolutely. As Gaia mentioned, the original idea was to have a mail art exhibition. So we were expecting to receive basically A4 artworks printed on A4 and posted through the post, through the regular post, which didn't happen. So we started receiving lots of files, and we started receiving emails with them, and of course, there were many ways in which we could have framed this material. I'm not saying that our way was the best way, but it's what we felt was more respectful on this of the work of the artist, and also I think again it's really for me when I started receiving the submission, the first thing I said to Gaia, oh, we must find a journalist at the BBC, because this is what they need to hear. This is people that are responding to what is happening around them, and by reading these submissions, we were really we really could understand what was happening in Wuhan and the impact of COVID on the communities, on the individuals, to a level that was absolutely unimaginable in national and international media, and this is why we decided to list the post in order of submission, because as Gaia very well put it, it's basically it's a kind of a history of how the understanding and the coping with COVID developed. And we publish the works and we publish the emails. Sometimes a very simple email say, hi, Gaia and Luigi and Sha, this is my submission. Let me know if you need anything else. It is might sound naive, but I think it's also a response to a certain over curation that happens in the arts, where let's say the curatorial framework kind of take over, which is meaningful and appropriate in certain circumstances, but in other circumstances, I think that like a facilitation, a work of facilitation and mediation is, in my opinion, more profitable.
Absolutely, I think that's really interesting that the project kind of began as something which had a kind of material possibility, right, of work that were limited to quite small scale that could actually be physically transported or sent to the UK. And in a way, the website also manages somehow to retain that kind of quality and a certain kind of rawness, I suppose is the word I keep going back to, both in terms of the kind of emotional experience, as well as the very kind of a kind of openness with which the artists have written the emails to, the correspondence in a sense between you guys here in the UK and the artists in Wuhan in Hubei. And I wonder if this might be a good juncture as well for us to look at some of these works, if Shali wants to share her PowerPoint.
So my name is Shali. I am a curator that does independent projects, and thank you, Winnie, for inviting us, and also let your class to engage with this project, so that we really have this dialogue, like to think about how to take care of this collection. And as Gaia was saying about, I started in this project in March 2020. It was actually before the lockdown in UK, and I visited her at her studio, and then she showed me some of the works, and I was deeply moved by actually the one that Gaia mentioned, Domo. And at that time, I was just like thinking about how to frame this as like exactly like what Luigi was criticizing of, like to think about in the like more or less so of a like curatorial framework. Like I was thinking of like stage 1, 2, 3, like how we can develop through, contain and also like delaying research, and also like keep digging into it deeper with various subjects matter and open up the subject matters. But once I got all the materials, and actually when Gaia shared the whole file with me on Google Drive, and I was like, I didn't know where to start. I understand it was mail art and it kind of transformed into like an email art project. So I looked into mail art as the predecessor of like internet art. And I was thinking about this project as like I'm looking into these little folders, like each into their spaces, and create this dialogue and interactivity with them. And that was kind of the starting point. And also at the same time, I was thinking, so how to present this to the public so that they have the same experience as us, like the level of transparency, and also to create this safe space and creating this dialogue. And also it's like a gathering place, a community space. So that's when we also tested out like various designs, and also because this is a nonprofit project, so I designed the website and also made the website myself to facilitate this kind of work. So we did the layout as like a blog post in mimicking a newspaper layout. I think that was the point where we want to use the style like to give a voice to individual to counter the mass media. And also through this act, I think also because the artists, some I recognize as, you know, they are artists, professional artists, and some they're like students, and some are designers. So I think through this channel, they can all kind of have their own spaces, but at the same time communicate to each other. And as a website, you know, you can access anytime, you can go in back and forth, and you can kind of making connections as you go. So I think that's where everything started. And so I want to go to Zijie's work. Yeah, so this is a work that I think is really relevant in terms to what Gaia was saying about this comic style, where people drawing is called 连环画 in Chinese, which is kind of symbolizes what happened using a cartoonish way. And if you go to, so this is the email that they sent to us, so we also included here. And if you go to the second slide, the one after this, so this is the work themselves. And yeah, can you, yeah. So some of the symbols, for instance, like flooding and waves, I think it's like it kind of very kind of directly kind of saying what it is, this pandemic to them. And so if you read Chinese, on the website, it has English translation. But here, if you read it, and also the material, when I laid it out here, I realized the material they were on, it was a copied page from the story 1001, the Arabic tale, which interestingly, a lot of artists and contributions references this work. And this is how Zijie dealing with this material. So he drawed over on top of the story and made his own story. And if you go to the next one on the slide. And again, they were saying this going back in time, like using drifting bottles to communicate. The communication was definitely a limitation for them. And they were using, you know, flags. They were using boat wobbling to kind of reference the unstable and unknowing future. They were communicate through this almost like, I guess, not knowing who are you talking to and who you're communicate with, but people somehow, because of this, kind of get together. And can you go to the next one, please? So yeah, here is where, you know, all the boats join together and then they start to drink virtually and kind of as a way to connect with one another. I think we all experienced that at one point in the lockdown. And if you go to the next one. Yeah, so here I think the story kind of got darker and more weight into it. It's when Dr. Li Wenliang died, and which here kind of made a metaphor as the weatherman. looking into the ocean, forecasting what's going to happen. But when he falls down, the people rise up. Consequently, and also I think maybe I'm inspired by this work. He was pulling up a newspaper, a self-published newspaper, and as a way to warn people. And I think this is where we thought, okay, so we can publish this website in a way as it's like a self-published newsletter. So we also get some of the interviews from the artists. So Zijie is one of them. I don't know, Luigi, if you want to show that.
那个去年我画了武汉日记，是我跟朋友在武汉封城期间的一段日子里，然后在城郊村里的所见所闻。然后日记里面就描述了疫情当中武汉村落生活的情况，还有城市里面被封锁的小区的困境形成了对比。然后我们也开始思考这个种植和不依靠单一的供求系统的可能。然后里面也写到了武汉，还有我的故乡广西这些地方人跟人之间的这个关系变化。然后呢，去年1年的时间里，我几乎都没有离开武汉。我当时跟朋友，然后一起去试图回应，就是这个期间遇到的各种问题，就比如说经济的问题，然后还有食物的问题，还有朋友跟朋友之间关系的问题。然后今年过年期间，我在武汉以外的地方就是待了更长的时间，然后感觉很多其他的人在试图挽回过去1年失去的那种效率，然后去加速的去生活，去赚钱，或者去做一些事情。然后呢，我现在我现在不是在自己家，我现在在上海，然后在上海来见我的一位朋友。这位朋友也是那个去年武汉封城期间，然后封城前夕来拜访了我的，然后当时一开始是他提醒我们戴口罩的。嗨，这个拍摄是吧？对。
I really like how the video ends there. And I think it really communicates this idea that they don't want to rely on just one source of, receiving information, but collectively we can also help each other. So I want to go to the next one, which is by Jingxiong. And this is when I actually did a close call to him to ask what is his life in Shanghai, because the lockdown kind of spread over to a national lockdown very quickly after Wuhan's lockdown. And so he answered me with his email. And also we talked on WeChat. He is artist, work from Anhui, but lives in Shanghai. So this was coming from his studio in Shanghai. He often creates large installation work, but due to lockdown, he had to either pause his production or create work digitally. And his work always kind of exploring like the general social mechanism or the lacking of it. And so he's really thinking about the intense social reality from an individual perspective. So the last time I actually encountered his work, it was at Sifang Museum's pop-up in Shanghai. It was like a space mimicking like the unpolished art space of Berlin, but actually situated in a residential space. So he really wants to create this rupture. And his work is really like this total ruin, and it's a burned material with charcoals, like it's really dark tone into it. And then this is where he created this like digital collages from his previous sculpture and with the living beings, like animals. And I think at the time, in the initial stage of lockdown, we were, and also a lot of contributions were saying that like, it's all bats' fault, that kind of thing. So he was referencing that. Yeah, so if you go to the next one, you can definitely see, and this is maybe the transition of him into digital creation of works. As he said, that's the only thing he can do, like in front of the screen. And do you mind play his interview?
拖了很久，所以现在刚刚开始录。然后首先李莎跟我说呢，谈一下去年的这个发给她的作品。那么当时我是有一个想法，觉得正好是在疫情期嘛，当时是2月份吧，好像去年的2月份。疫情期的时候我也没什么事干嘛，就把作品跟互联网上已经有的一些我很喜欢的，就是现成的图片做了一个拼贴。因为我一直觉得艺术作品的这种在网络上这种传播方式有些过于单调了，而且也过于显得重要了，就是艺术永远是重要的，就这个观念就我不太喜欢，所以就开始用一些很奇怪的一些现成的图片，比如说我以前做过白银的那个一组绘画的项目，然后它是关于一个谋杀案的，所以我就会搜集一些谋杀案的图片，然后跟它放在一起，就我认为这样其实还挺好玩的。然后李莎说让我们再谈一下这个疫情的影响。其实疫情它不会成为我就直接拿来创作的一个素材，但它确实改变了就是大家的生活嘛，它对人们的心理层面的影响更大。而且其实现在我们谈疫情的影响有点，因为身在其中嘛，你身在其中的话太近了，主要我认为是太近了，需要一个更长的时间。那有一些改变是能看到的，比如说从我们的心理上来说，无所事事的状态增多了，而且并不会感到内疚，这是第一。第二来说，从我周边的生活能感觉到，比如说上海啊，就是艺术展览都是以本土的艺术家为主，然后销售今年也是以本土艺术家为主导，对吧？然后第三点，我认为其实是国内能明显感觉到，就是这种民粹主义的这个趋势吧，还挺明显的。主要从我的经验来说，主要就是3点吧。
I remember a funny story when I asked him during the lockdown, and when he was locked inside in his studio, he was really saying that in Chinese, it's like 孤岛修仙, which means you're cultivating from being isolated islands. And I think we've all experienced that at one point at the same time. So I think I really can connect with each one of them and what they have been through in this journey. And so next one, Ge Yulu. He is a very interesting artist, actually. He's from Wuhan, and one of his like more famous pieces is actually he named a street as his name on Baidu map, and that actually turned out to be a real street name in reality, because in his name Ge Yulu, Lu means like road, so he actually named the road his name. And but by that time, he was always like an outsider from the art world. But last year, actually, just after the lockdown, he had this amazing show at Beijing Commune. And I think it's all a part of his practice, which is like this performative aspect. And he really wants to use his physical body to express something. So for that exhibition, actually, he modified an electricity generator. So by constantly like stepping on the bicycle, he will convert the kinetic energy into electrical energy to store in the battery and carry the bicycle to the exhibition space, and then using that battery to generate the power in his exhibition. And sometimes you would see the videos, sometimes you would not, like power outage because of power outage, but that's okay, because he's like, you're not expecting, you're expecting something, and then almost like a surprise to the audiences. And you will see him in the backside of the exhibition space, stepping on the bicycle to generate powers for his exhibition. But I think here he submitted this, I think also speak to the kind of same feeling. So this is from his previous work in a way. He kneaded and folded and ironed it with an iron, so that it seems like nothing has happened again. And this work was particularly interesting is because he actually mailed this piece of paper to Gaia's studio right before the mail service disrupted. Luigi, can you go to the next couple of images? So it's almost like a performance piece with photo documentation.
After this worldwide epidemic. Hello everyone. First, I want to apologize for my terrible English. Please don't mind. I wish I could practice my language in a foreign situation, and we could do such cultural exchange by face-to-face after this worldwide epidemic. And about my work, it just looks like an ordinary paper without any writing and image. If you look at this paper closely, you will find it looks a little worn out. It seems to be treated as a new piece of paper, but some traces of the past are hidden in it. In fact, this paper has been kneaded rapidly and filled with past marks. Because during the emergency time of the epidemic, I think it is difficult for any specific language and image to describe my class and anxiety at that time. Nowadays, memories are controlled. Individual history written is forbidden. More and more limitation in our expression. Therefore, I still cannot use any specific image and words to record those histories. The paper chose at the beginning was just an ordinary piece of paper, but after being flattened by high temperature, it seems nothing happened. All the information about his own experience could only be found in details cracks that could not be bridged. The interesting thing is, the silence recorded on this piece of paper at the beginning echoes the memory loss of today. Thank you.
Just when I watched this interview, I remembered I was talking to one of the contributors, Liu Xinyi, to talk about like this interview that we wanted to do for this talk. And we talked actually for 2.5 hours, and I jotted down some notes on my notebook. And one day I just spilled water on top of it, and then it just wiped out everything. And as if this conversation never happened again. And also I think a lot of the things that he was saying, for instance, like working in an institution, how life has changed, how, their privacy has been limited to nothing even. So all of these things, I think what I can really relate to is that they're all kind of creating something under limitation. So which leads to this work, this poem by Shen Liang, who is a curator in China, and he wrote this poem called 1001, which is a direct reference to the Arabic story, Arabic tale. And I can read how he his inspiration and how under what condition he did this project. So he was saying that Haüsler, which is the character in the story, is the storyteller in the collection of Arabic folk tales 1001 Nights. King Shahara hated women, and each night he would marry a new woman and kill her early in the next morning. Shahrazad kept the king interested by telling him stories to delay his death. The story she told went on 1001 nights. During these nights, the king gradually affected by and eventually changed, and the two lived happily ever after. The situation Shahrazad faced, the endless demands of ruthless readers, is also a common situation for those that work in creative professions. To me, her story is like creating under extreme conditions that can exhaust one's imagination. Life in the king's chambers, the monarch's scenery and encounters is meager inspiration for the duration of 1001 nights. In the current situation of isolation, on lockdown, I recall Shahrazad and wrote this 1001 word poem. And this poem is written in Chinese and translated by Miranda Curtis and Dot Jia, which I want to thank them for, because it's not an easy poem to translate with all the structure and constructed word and how they rhyme. So Luigi, do you mind to share the video?
1001，这房间的结构像只副歌，却有人听出深埋的壮心。当寝宫趁夜折磨了正殿，唯我的猫能洞察此事。它看夜莺时，它在看塔楼；它看酒盅里的舌头，它在看伊玛目。灾变总从不默契开始。那日到来前，云色寡淡，失眠者的头在枕上敲打鼓点。谁的身体投影在我脸上，喷血的伤正叠合我吟咏的口。忽然那河不想再做河，一夜之间变成一座花园。那山想变灯芯没能遂愿，空自将峰顶燃成黄昏。像作家一心等待事变，争先鄙视下坠的舞姿。前半程只有我在说，后半程我谁也不相信。转瞬我们沉入水底，眼见兵马倒影走来，耳边唯有浪声翻覆，心窍暧昧如同公海。我被冠上许多头衔，仿佛变成一众人群，人人举起一只独眼，要将世界细看一遍。南边窗外是一段江水，隔岸列车清空了货舱，西边一道门并未封锁，却不通往任何交集。北边的阳台俯瞰公园，几丛花木簇拥着滑梯。你说我在此注视太久，才有坠落的荒唐梦境。东边有一块监控屏幕，带火的小行星边走边玩，是否会来还不能确定，却常变出惨烈的图景。谁见了都会发生高度一致的反应。看唯一的真实，谁不想被它抵消？我躲进房中一间密室，有温水注满白瓷浴缸，躺入将双脚举过头顶，像在虚空里倒立疾奔。两脚间是你送的古画，画中人如云旅相互纠缠，以拥抱挡住彼此的去路，像藤蔓挤引同一血缘。我捡出几人放进浴缸，齐力航向画中的海洋。中途的谈吐令我烦躁，靠岸用它们换了香炉。香炉中的燃料是很多张面孔，烟雾悬成穹顶，在夕阳下停转。 穹顶下有位蒙罪博士，解错了梦而被判腰斩。唐雪的半生对王告白，此刻的感受适合写诗。爱与秋色是他的跟班，诗中的风景厌倦游人，山峰重叠如重重花瓣，猎户在花间遇到狮子，狮子将他的身体吃尽，只剩一颗含苞的潜心，心中走出个小型僧侣，悠然念出西涧的经文。经中的道理无上严谨，字与字都在相互提防。巨树枝头缀满了面具，晨雾一浅，便失掉用场。孔雀在树顶摇曳尾羽，好像一丛明亮的靶心，路上积攒了多少朋友，此时要像箭全部射出。箭囊上绣着红发妖魔，独坐在河畔冲洗岛屿，洗掉的废污顺流飘下，终有一匹昏死的骏马。商贾贪图上游资讯，解下马背驮的包裹，得到一张杂色之毯，铺平四角便能飞天。他坐上飞毯调教鹦鹉，口瞻一座未来的城池，先知都有透明的肚皮，将要在火中平分奇迹。火亦对水眼说，水却按兵不动，藏于两只驼峰，暗自映出万物。万物罗列在眼前，天使正互相讽刺，活人向死人求教，说出你我的名字。我在密室中凝视画面，念头如公式逐个推导，新书旅行两只羽翼，已是一对卷起的蛛网。王命令故事日日绵延，深宫的窗前景物不变，往来只有无知的仆从，你是否也觉想象穷尽？必须有闪电照亮远路，因此你只在雨天前来。溢出浴缸边沿的水滴，是一睁开就破的白眼。我在这禁闭中迎接你，掏空心思的山鲁佐德，你我假扮合伙的作者，写完这1001个字。
Thank you. And I want to end there with the presentation because I think his response is almost like what we would respond to this collection of work, is that we have this emotionally connection with the storytellers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Shani, for that presentation. And I think it's really lovely to hear Shen Poliang's voice, reading it out and really conveying the kind of emotion he felt at the time. And I really love how these videos, in a sense, are kind of also like messages in a bottle, in a way, these contributions from the artists. So right now, I'd like to invite the audience to ask questions to the panel. And while we wait for those to come in through the chat, I was wondering, Shali, perhaps if you could talk a little bit about what it's been like corresponding, with the artists in China, since the end of the quarantine there, and as we are in quarantine in many other parts of the world. Has it been quite difficult to, how willing have they been, in a sense, to reflect upon that particular moment, that time? And is there some kind of, almost resistance in a way to return to that very difficult moment, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and even for me, like, I do not want to think about that we're still in a lockdown. And, but when I reach out to them, I think partially because under this limitation, for some artists, they can create, which is like Ge Yulu, use this limitation as one of their creation. But at the same time, for some artists, they kind of like, they only can pause what they're trying to do. And also, it's like in this forced dynamic, how do you create? It's like the 1001 night that you have to come up with like everything inside of you to almost like please someone. So I think for that, like we have to have like empathetic views about like creators, like also not only the information they receive, but also what kind of the output of that. I think this is like where we can really feel like the human aspect of in behind all of the artists. And of course, you know, we all experienced this this year, like even, you know, traveling and going to you know, shops and restaurants, you know, that all has limitation. And this is the reality that we do not want to face. And for them, it's the same thing. And they have to, you know, every time they go somewhere, they have to report on an app, and so it's always there. So they have to deal with the post-trauma from the lockdown.
Yeah, I think that idea of creative tension and frustration is really embodied by that Yulu work of, you know, the artist kind of, you know, that single sheet of paper that just gets worked and reworked in this kind of, you know, epitomizing that sort of boredom and frustration that one feels under these conditions, and also the kind of pressures that exerts upon, you know, the act of creativity, right? The limitations of that too. So we've got a couple of questions here. Maybe we can deal with the first one first. And maybe this is a question, in fact, for Gaia, I think. How do you think the notion of the studio has changed since isolation?
Oh, I guess that's I can answer for myself, not for all artists. I mean, I've always lived in my studio. So for me, it didn't change so much. What changed, like my daily life, what changed a lot is, and what I miss a lot is a moment of exchange, because already it's quite lonely practice, at least my kind of practice, and not having the kind of the opening, the moment of exhibiting the work and having the public reacting kind of in the space and in real life, it's been a bit difficult, because one asks themselves, like, I don't know, who do I do it for? And even this thing of the digital shows, I mean, I'm standing in front of a work which is currently being shown, and is even like got collected, like it's been bought, but it's still here. So it's like if like the work are just accumulating in the space of a studio and they never leave. So it's a very strange, it's like, I don't know, it's almost like one wonders if your efforts are real, like, you know, if actually there is a response to what an art, or like what I'm making as an artist, if it actually, if these things exist, if out there, you know, are the work actually a reason for dialogue? Are the work actually going to have a life independently from me and from my studio? But this, I guess, is like everybody has a different answer. Then what happened to me is that I started making many different kind of works. I started making many audio works, and I started focusing a lot on this project. And so I continued with the paintings and physical works, but also kind of develop other practices that could still happen in their actual format, not just as images of a work in this time of pandemic.
And we have following from that, we've got another question. Thank you very much, Gaia, Luigi, and Charlie, for such a rich discussion. And this is a question from Daphne. I'm really interested in various points that were raised about the role that these lockdown artists play in social care work, addressing the current precariousness of the pandemic and anti-Asian violence. So Daphne would love to hear more from the speakers on their thoughts of how spaces for creative intervention on the real can continue to be forged amidst censorship and the rapid spread of conspiracy narratives in global news. So who would like to go first with that one? Perhaps Charlie, do you want to comment on that, this idea of of the idea of social care work and how, you know, whether or not this project and the artists contributing to the project, in a sense, have a kind of agency or are able to intervene in amidst issues of censorship and the international news media.
Thank you. That's a really good question. And it kind of reminds me of what, so basically we also have another section that's has not been published on the website yet, which is a critical reflection section where Winnie's student also contributed, and also my friend contributed. I think some of their sayings actually better than what I trying to say. And so this is one of by Josie Spella, who I worked with at AGYU, and she wrote this piece about, you know, anti-Asian hate. And so I think people have various thoughts. I think that's the thing. And also that's about this project as well. It's an evolving idea that is a collective voice. And also, I think this problem is really real. Like, I think this is something we all kind of have to, in this day, kind of filter through what is real to us. Yeah, I think just by critically engaging, I think that's the only way I can think of. Although this project we didn't want to do as a more like a critical approach, but that doesn't mean that's never thought of. Yeah. Thank you.
Luigi, did you have something to add to that?
No, I think Sha expressed it very well. I don't mind taking the following question, which is quite. Rory is asking why we have included works made before the pandemic. What I want to say about this project is that, and what I like about this project is that it's not perfect. It's really not perfect. It's full of imperfections. Most of the artists are from Wuhan, but some are not. The large majority of the work were done during the lockdown, but some weren't. And this is how we ran it, we conducted it, and I think in this imperfection, in a way, in this spontaneity of the project lies some of its merit. I believe, but I hope the viewers won't be too much disturbed or bothered by this. But I think but all the published submissions have been received by us. Maybe we just actually one exception, which is Shen Buliang's poem, have been received during the lockdown period. So some artists sent us in response work that they made before, and actually Jiang Cheng, whom Rory quotes, I think I can understand why I submitted that work for this call, and what the relation of this work would be with the pandemic. And again, I think one way of without telling how users should approach the archive, but I think it's an archive which is quite varied and quite rich, and I think it's open to everyone's journey. I think we can do our own journey, and I think which is actually what I believe is probably a key point in what at least people in the arts and culture do, is that you do something trying to provoke a response in someone else, but you don't want to control that response. It's not that you are instructing someone or teaching someone. We presented something that can be certainly interpreted in many ways and can arise different emotions. But thanks for the question.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have another question now, which is about, what's your opinion on how a digital archive affects the material-based work when the work have turned into images? kind of an interesting, quite a philosophical question there. So perhaps, so is the question then from Dot, is the question about whether or not the kind of afterlife of these works and practices in digital form then affects the original, the kind of materiality of the piece. Perhaps Dot, you want to clarify the question a little bit, or perhaps one of you would like to comment on your thoughts on that.
I'll go very briefly, and well, of course we must mention NFT. Apparently, it's the hot topic, and why not mention it? But actually, one of the interesting possibly questions about work that have an NFT linked to them is whether the physical work should survive. So basically, once you, of course, create like a digital reproduction or a digital work, and you basically you make it original in a way, you make it authentic. What shall we do with the physical work? I don't think there are any rules. I think we reacted. If we had received mail works, we would have not scanned them probably and put them on our website as we did. We did this because we received digital works. This is what I feel. Maybe Guy or Shah have different opinions.
I mean, I think that a lot of things a lot of choices that may seem as choices in this project, they were just constraints and what was possible to do. In a moment in which the post service is interrupted, well, there is not much other choice than to photograph the works, or if we're doing an exhibition with no budget, and my studio is 40 square meters, I can't actually import big works from China and store them and send them back. So, I mean, we originally, even what Luigi answered about the works, at which date they were from, we asked the artists, like, the brief was, we'd like to receive works that fit into an envelope, and please send them by regular post. So it means, probably we'll receive photocopies, or we may receive sketches, or we may receive, so it evolved into digital, and I mean, happy for it to be digital. I'm sure, what the artists do with the works, it's, they have a separate life, these works. It's not, we're not kind of dealing with them right now. Yes. I see a question about the future artistic curatorial practice. I think in this whole project, the fact that, it's a collaborative project, but like originally I initiated it, and I'm just like an artist writing to other artists, and we don't really know each other. And I always, I often consider that like, a disadvantage, as if maybe, I could imagine this advantage in a sense, well, what can this person offer as visibility? What can this person offer as budget for my show? But actually, if the project is kind of in a certain size, if it doesn't require that much effort to the artist, what it offers is a dialogue among peers, which and also a very non-hierarchical dialogue, in which there is not necessarily big, I didn't have any grand design of what I wanted to receive, or what we wanted to receive, or how we wanted to show it. And the project really shaped itself around what we received and the constraint that we had to work with. Which I think made.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, in this idea of constraints, I think the next question is really interesting one, which is a question from Miranda, and it's about asking what kind of considerations you had to take when conducting kind of cross-cultural organization and curation during this period in formulating this project. And I think, to add to that slightly, perhaps you guys would be able to talk very briefly about the kind of some of the kind of miscommunications or the potential for miscommunication, right? Or the potential for even kind of misinterpretation or misrepresentation, because obviously this is a project that was created between London and Wuhan with interlocutors, and in spite of the kind of ease of digital communication, there are lots of questions that are nevertheless raised. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I like to say just a couple of anecdotes. The first one is that we had to translate actually Boliang Chen, he offered to translate our open call, and he kind of had to censor a lot of, reword it so that it wouldn't get filtered, because certain words that we had used in English, if they were going to be translated, they would be blocked. I think at some point during the Wuhan lockdown, something like, over 20 words just referring to infection, like kind of breathing infections were censored. So, or like lockdown was censored, like flu was censored, pneumonia was censored. So there were all these things to move around. And also, I guess on that respect, we were a bit worried when we had to put the works online. What did that expose the artists to? Because one thing is to have a physical show in London that only people in London see, and another thing is having content online which is open to who knows. Yes, then maybe there is other reflections on this.
Charlie, would you like to comment on that? As somebody who's really, kind of been an interface in a sense between the artists in China as well as the rest of the curatorial team and yourself.
I actually want to answer other questions about the digital ones.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yes,
because I think this project actually really kind of somehow started my digital curation. So for instance, I work as facilitate digital collections at an institution. And at the same time, I now transition into working for NFTs. And I think the idea of real also come into this as well. I think these all kind of connected in a way, authenticity. I think it's very interesting. I think digitally, when you, for a lot of the archive pieces, even websites, it all becomes an archive of something. We are creating images now, especially if you think about social media. Even, I'm in Canada at the moment, looking at exhibitions elsewhere, I'm looking through social media. So it's already, I see this transition material to work into a digital image. And, for instance, if you collect, also you buy from the PDF. And also, other things as well, even creating, when I see exhibitions, especially during this time, a lot of institutions, they've transitioned into their practice into online exhibitions. And so this is really interesting, because I think this is almost the start of something. And then during this time, I think NFT kind of boomed up. And what's good about it, and also relate to this project, is actually it creates this community and also authenticity, you can verify something, you can verify, and also give a lot of power to the artist, which is also something I was thinking about when I facilitate this project, because we gather this work, and this is of course almost no budget project. But how do we asking for their time, for their creation, but in the end, we cannot really give back to any of them. So I think this is something I think the art world should really consider. And I hope this is this is the beginning that we could all contribute some way.
Yeah,
And on that note, sorry, go ahead, please, Luigi.
Adding to what Shah said, yes, it's a below zero budget for this project, which actually is really something that I think we all did it with the utmost enthusiasm and the utmost interest in it, because I think what we are creating, have been creating, and actually hopefully will create, because the idea is to open up a section on the website welcoming reflections and responses in a way, and is exactly to start a dialogue. And there are, what I can see around me is that bridges are being cut, bridges are being demolished in all sorts of ways. And I think what we've been trying to do is to build a virtual bridge, which for kind of like a mutual help in a way. Just the fact of someone saying, "Oh well, we are happy to listen and to see what you have to say about your experience," and then the response being, "Oh yes, this is how we feel." This is something which makes this incredibly unique in a way. Well, not unique, because of course this is what artistic dialogue is about, but I think it makes it very precious.
Thank you, Luigi. I think that was really well said. And I think Yulu in his video made a similar point about, the kind of intense proximity we all have at the moment to, the pandemic and the conditions, unfortunately, that have befallen all of us since then. But the project, in a way, stands as a sort of, a time capsule on one hand that captures, a very specific moment in a way that we can then use as a resource and as something to go back to and look at and engage with in the future as well, once we've had more distance from it, perhaps. And I think the idea of, could you just elaborate a little bit more on how you see the project developing in the future? Has there been any plan to actually, hold an exhibition, hold the original exhibition in a sense, the mail art exhibition or something similar to that material in IRL, as it were, in real life?
Well, when there is three of us, and you will hear three very different opinions on what to do next.
If you could briefly, as an end to this very interesting talk, perhaps you could all each very briefly summarize your kind of plans, as it were, or talk a little bit about how you see the project evolving.
For me, is about being open and initiating and making possible a discourse to happen, possibly hosted on the website. But at the same time, for me, it is essential to preserve this work as an archival record. I think this is a historical record of one of the largest disasters that struck our world probably in a century, and we managed to take a blurry but very interesting picture.
Gaia.
Yeah, I agree with Luigi about this idea of the historical value of the work as an archive. But also I remember that when we started receiving all this material, and before the London lockdown, Luigi and I, and before even choosing, but we were really speaking about, or maybe we are not kind of us alone, we're not necessarily the best people to look at it, in the sense that I think to see the value and understand the value of these works in a way that, like, how could we show them if there was like an opportunity to show them physically, it would be, for me, it would be necessarily another collaboration in a way. I wouldn't imagine setting up this show, just us, or as if, it's like it would be another opportunity for a further dialogue and for further in-depth studies, as if indeed happened with yourself, when and the students at Courtauld.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of an ideal outcome for Ami.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Different kind of iterations. Please, Shali.
Oh, sorry to jump in, because it also reminds me when we have conversation with I was conversation with Gaia, and we kind of talk about the feelings evoked with this collection, a therapeutic one. And also this relates to, I think, why people, in contact with us and the kind of trusting us without knowing who we are, is that they were also desperate to find a channel to voice out their conditions. And this is where we provided this safe space. And I hopefully in future we can also to do so, because even right now we're in a lockdown, and I think in the future we will also face what they're going to happen right now in China as well. And so I think this critical lens perhaps is the next way. So it's like it's always evolving. Even today, like I received this contribution from the Xinyi very last minutes, like 10 minutes before the talk, and he was saying, because of this, he finally can have a closure of what he started at that point. And I found it incredibly moving. And I didn't show it now is because it's not translated yet. So I think we need to find a proper way to kind of distribute it, and also to at the right time to do so. Yeah. So I think, so that's it.
Well, I think that on that note, that's a perfect way to end this really interesting discussion, and to remind everybody to keep checking the website and going back to look at new material like Liu Xinyi's contribution, and also another very well-known artist, He Xiangyu, has a letter that will be going up soon, also about to be translated. And so thank you all very much for sharing this project with us and for this really stimulating discussion. Thank you for the really fantastic questions from the audience as well. And just to end, I'd like to remind everyone the next event in the series will take place on Tuesday, the 11th of May, and it's titled Blueprints for the Otherwise, featuring the artist JJ Chan in conversation with Sunshine Wong. They will be discussing social and cultural events of the past year and how they might pave the way for the notion of critical care as an ethos and infrastructure for art organizations. And details of that can be found on the Courtauld Research Forum website. And I look forward to seeing you all then. So thank you, everybody. And thank you to our speakers, especially.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.